I'm in danger.
Alright. Hi everyone, and thank you all for being here on this rainy day. My name is Magni, Warlord Magni, and this is my nth installment of my Noob to Warlord series, and today we're doing stabs. So the topics that we're going to cover today is the basics of like how to stab, when and where to stab, talking about the strategy of when and when not to use stabs, as well as going through some stabs for Florentine, single sword, and sword and board. All right, so first up, we're going to talk about how to stab. All right, so stabs is really important in knowing how to do it correctly because this is one of the easiest ways to hurt people. When stabbing, there's kind of three different planes you can do. You can do a downward stab, right? This is probably the most preferred because if you slide, you're sliding away from the face. Typically what happens when people start fighting is they'll throw this low stab, and this is where you slide up and you can stab people in the neck and the face, and this hurts, right? We don't want to hurt people. The third type of stab is a flat stab where you're not going down, you're not going up, you're going flat, right? So it's going this way. Typically, if you're sliding, you're going to slide off the body, okay? Now, with those three angles, you can do a variety of different stabs, right? It's just this rotation, and it's raining. It's great. Okay, so when you're stabbing, you can do, this is our typical standard guard that most people fight in. You can stab by just arm thrusting, right? That's probably the simplest way to do it. You can step forward with the stab. This is a way to generate a more powerful stab. Additionally, you can let your opponent step in, and then you can let them impale themselves. That always feels really great when they kill themselves. Beyond just a standard step, you can lunge. This is very typical for people that are from like fencing backgrounds, where they boom come in and do this deep, fast close of range, and then they stab. Right? That's a really powerful force generation. So try not to like murder people when you do that. Additionally, the last thing in terms of stabs, in doing a stab, and this is one that I like to do, is a rotation of the hips. So I'm not going like this. I put my arm out into position, and then I rotate my body to do the stab. Also be conscientious because since I'm doing this whole body rotation, there's a lot of force behind the stab. So again, like, be conscientious of potentially hurting people. So now that we know how to like throw stabs, it's also, I briefly want to talk about how to block stabs. So blocking stabs is typically pretty simple. Going back to my day one fundamentals, we have our house guard, right? Like this, but typically your stabs are going to come in at the torso. So what you do is if you stab, you're typically just moving the sword, moving the sword out of position. A lot of simple rotations. You can also sweep, right? And that, depending on how you do the block, you can load yourself up or chamber yourself for different attacks or riposte. This is coming from the inside stab, right? So I would rotate out to my left if you're stabbing, right? But if you're going to stab from this direction, I would do the same thing, but rotate in the other direction. Mechanically, stabs are pretty simple. All right. But now, a little bit more complicated is when and where to stab. So primarily, stabs are going to be targeted at the torso location, right? We're trying to get kill shots. Also, it's the biggest surface area mass. If you try to stab the arms, it's typically really hard. They're thin objects, unless you're like some people that have real big, beefy arms, like this guy. All right. But additionally, when we're talking about stabbing, what you want to think about and what you want to look for is an opening in the guard, right? So if you rotate this way, come here, right? So this is the guard that we're going to be looking at. There you go. So the spot that I would typically want to stab is right here. So you have in stabbing, you have these 1D dimensional lines of where you're throwing the shot. This is very different from, say, a slash or a wrap, because a slash is, it's a plane. So you have to think about the angle of what you're doing. So if I want to get, here, let's actually rotate this way. So if I want to get this slot, with the slash, I would have to come in like this, right? But now I need to come in this way. If instead I want to get this shoulder, I think it's actually a better, here, rotate. A better example, your guard would be like that. If I want to go like this, it's really easy for you to block out. You just have to rotate a little bit. So I have to either step out to get the angle, or I need to work under to get around the guard. And this is different from a slash, right? Because with a slash, I have now a lot of surface area that I can throw, whereas with the stab, it's just this like 2.5-inch circle. So just be very conscientious of the angle, right? I'm going to need to work around. This is, I think, going to be really exemplary when we pick up Sword and Board. Okay? Woo! All right. So additionally, talking about when and where to stab, thinking about when to stab, most stabs come in when you're at mid to late B range, and you plan the stabs in C range. And so if you don't know about that, or not familiar with the ranges, I suggest looking at my range control video and movement. That's in the playlist below. But very briefly, B range is right here where I can begin to touch. C range is when I can't touch. Okay? And the reason being is with stabs, I just need to touch you. I don't need any other part of my sword to touch you besides the tip. Additionally, most stabs, once you're in A range, this real close grinding range, it's really hard to get a stab in. Most people don't throw stabs in close range, because if I want to stab, I have to come all the way out and then I can stab. And so this is a very like telegraphed, high time intensive movement. Whereas out here, I can just boop, it's really fast. I don't have to do a lot. And in the mid to late B, I can do a bunch of things, right? Like I can do the step forward. I can just throw my arm out like I talked about in throwing those stabs. Whereas in the C range, I can do this big lunge, for example. All right, let's see what else. Ah, there it is. Okay, so with that basically covered, I want to begin. I think those are kind of like the basics of knowing when to stab, where to stab. I want to talk now about the strategy of throwing stabs. I think this is where things can be a little bit more complicated, but I think strategic, or like it's more of a mental puzzle and more fun in the fighting aspect. So when throwing stabs, you always want to look for the opening, knowing what you're trying to hit, right? If I want to hit this shoulder, I need to make that opening. So I need to throw a setup. So throw down, boom, do the stab. I mean, I know I hit their hand, but you get the point. So working with a variety of different combinations. So throw, typically when you throw this shot, your opponent's going to bring their guard out, and then I can stab. So if we flip it, if I throw this chop, stab, right? Or if I want that shoulder, again, in. Or what I like to do is integrate a lot of footwork into this. If we back up just a little bit. No. Yeah, there you go. What I like to do is integrate footwork where I'm not moving my sword, I'm moving my body around their equipment of stepping out. And you can do it high or you can do it low. And you can integrate this with shots of boom, right? And stuff like that. So you need to, when you're strategizing your stabs, you're typically out here in C range and trying to plan what you want to throw. And then you need to try to create your opening. Additionally, something to keep in mind about stabs and strategy is, depending on the type of stab that you throw, it can be a very time-intensive shot. If you throw a really devoted stab of like, oh, boom, I'm now like really out of position, right? So this is a bad spot, I can get killed, and for me to recover, I have to bring my whole body back before I can now move out of range. Whereas you can throw these more like minimalistic stabs of just you're throwing your arm, or you're moving out of range, stuff like that. So be conscientious about how much time you're devoting to the stab. If you commit something really, really hard, it's really easy to put yourself out of position and die. Okay? Like, for example, if we switch sides, if, for example, your opponent has really good footwork, I throw this stab and they move out of position, then yeah, I'm like real screwed. So just be conscientious about that recovery time. Last, with strategy, I think stabs are a really great way to control the meta of a fight with another fighter over several fights. And the reason why is, like, people don't like to be stabbed. And often once you land a stab 2, 3, 4 times, they're like, oh, I don't want that to happen again. So you can use that to your advantage of, okay, I throw this, like, I get this belly stab a couple times. It's really easy. Your opponent's probably going to, like, twitch to that or respond to that really hard. So if I throw this, they're going to move, boom, right? So you can use that to your advantage. Obviously, if you throw the fake every time, it's not always going to work. So you still have to throw the stab. And sometimes you need to do more than just the movement. You need to, like, pump it more and then throw, or, you know, boom, boom. Also, one thing really quick that's nice about stabs is if we switch sides. If you're up against an opponent's guard, you can often use your opponent's guard as a railing or as a guide. So if I'm in this position, if I stab and I miss, I can recalibrate and throw again, and I don't have to pull all the way back. So just something to think about in throwing the stabs. So now, with strategy and all the other basics covered, I'm going to go through the different categories. So single, Florentine, and sword and board. First, going to cover single. So a lot of your stabs with single sword is going to be dependent on the guard that they're using, right? So there's 3 different guards. You have your standard guard, you have a cross guard, and then you have an inverted guard. Okay? The different stabs that I have easily at my capacity and that I can get on my opponent is going to depend on my guard and their guard, right? Because if I'm in this guard, what I have available to be hit on me is very different than if I have this guard. Does that make sense? Okay? So, in a standard guard, it's really easy to just do this, like, simple pop in, because I just have to go inside their guard and throw. From this guard, I don't even have to move my sword. I can just step in. Okay? Whereas if I have this, like, cross guard, what I have to do is I have to come over and throw. I really like this cross guard when I fight single, but instead of having to go down, this is where I'm using a lot of my hips, and then I move into the shot to get the power. Additionally, when you move your body, it typically gets a bigger response from your opponent. Okay? So just like when you're fighting or sparring or pelling with somebody, just look at the different guards that you have and think about what you can and can't get. For example, if we're in this standard guard, it's often always really hard for me to get this shoulder, especially if we're not hand matched. So I have to either go really far in or I have to step out to get it. So just things to think about, okay? Additionally, with single, return stabs are really great. So if your opponent throws on you, so like throw this cross, no, throw like here, right? I can block and then I can stab in. That's a really great riposte that you can do, especially even if they go throw the outside. I can throw. Sometimes, I mean, like, be careful with it and how you throw. But typically, once your opponent hits your equipment, they're going to be trying to draw back into guard. And so that gives you a split second to throw in. And also, you're guiding off of their equipment. If they throw a hip scoop, so throw here. No. Throw down. Nope, here. Right? Boom. It's a lot of this house guard, and all you're doing is blocking, and then you can throw straight into the stab. It works almost the same exact way as like throwing the slash. So throw, boom, but now instead of throwing the slash, you guard, and then throw. It's even faster than the slash or the chop. So learning how to like block strike with the stab is really powerful. With single as well, using pumps is really important because you're now you have to get your opponent to respond and make an opening. So I pump here, boom, boom, right? You throw something like a slash, and then you get an opening, and then you can throw, or you throw a stab, and then you throw, right? Or you pump a stab, and then you can throw. I think the pump stab into a real stab is always really fun and something that people don't anticipate. And that's pretty much what I showed, where you act like you're going to stab, and then you wait for them to respond, and then you actually throw the stab, right? So, boom, and you can like use your hand to get the block. Let's see. Step up. One of my favorite combos with single as well is the stab is the last portion of this. Let's go this way. So in single, I like to throw this slash, boom, boom, boom. It's sometimes hard to get off, but you're throwing 4 shots in fast succession, and hopefully by the end of it, you should be landing something. Work on the iteration because it's 4 fast shots. Yeah, I guess that's what I have with that one. And then you can also do the step stab where I'm stepping offline to get around my opponent's equipment. You don't always have to step this way, away from their sword. You can step into their sword side. Well, you typically wouldn't respond to that.
Yeah, I was scared of the stab.
I've been trying to be nice.
I responded strongly to the stab.
Yeah, right. So typically when you're stepping offline, your opponent's going to bring their guard in that direction, and then you throw the stab. So integrating your footwork with different categories and trying to play the bait game to get an opening is really the whole idea behind stabs. Okay. Moving into Florentine, it's kind of the same thing. So it's whole same concept, but now the difference is that I have 2 swords. Can I borrow a sword really fast? Thank you. So with Florentine, right, it's the same concept. I have to get an opening, and depending on the way that their stance is going to give a different opening. But this is a pretty typical stance for a Florentine fighter. The primary easy target is this stab right here, right? If we flip sides, if you flip stance, right, it would now be my opposite arm that would want to throw the shot. Because what I'm doing is I'm throwing between your swords, right? This is their guard, and you're going in between the swords. Often when you throw between the swords, it's really hard to block because you can push the sword into your other sword, or like people have to do a more devoted movement to get out of the way. Okay. Additionally, so if you go to like this sort of guard, yeah, there you go. Let's go this side. So depending on the type of guard that they have, you can throw different shots to get them to choke up and get the stab in. One nice thing is if like your opponent crosses their swords, is you can throw this shot, you choke off all of the lanes, and then you stab in. If your opponent has like this like minimalized sort of guard, same thing. I block the lanes, I stab, I can stab high, I can stab low. Okay? Additionally, what you can do with Florentine and stabbing is you can fake either on alternate sides or high-low. So I throw up, you're going to think, oh shit, this is going to happen, and I come from underneath, right? Or I throw, whoop, boom. It's the same mechanics as single sword, but now I have this other sword to sell it even more. And sometimes you even want to throw the slash. Stab, right? I know that was your leg, but still works. Okay, let's see. Yeah, so even with Florentine, important to move your feet, important. I'm a big movement person in my fighting style, so that's kind of what I'm going to preach. Footwork is how you make the dream work. So integrating footwork into your movements and integrating shots into that, I think is really powerful. And that's how I've gotten a lot of success. Now, finally, for sword and board, this is where things get interesting. Can we borrow a board really fast? All right. So sword and board is very difficult to throw stabs because now all of this area is shut down. So you really have to sell the fakes and get your equipment to move, or get your opponent to move their equipment. Typically, the best way that you're going to have is you're going to have to fight. You're going to have to get this side because the board side is almost always cut down. If we flip sides, the only way that I'm ever going to get that board side on a stab is I'm going to have to move all the way over. You're not supposed to move. And then, maybe I can get something. But your opponent's going to see that. They're going to respond super, super easily. So it's going to be easiest to get this inside board side. Or the sword side, sorry. So, how are you going to do that? One of my favorite shots on board is this pocket stab. And so what you do is you throw like this chop, and typically what your opponent's going to do is they're going to move up and over, and then you stab in. If you miss, you're railed in, so you just throw again, right? Board is really nice because you have this guiding system, and if you get like your opponent to throw this side, like throw out more, if I miss, I can keep coming in, and as long as I don't overpull from the board, right, as long as my sword is still on the lip, I still have access. I still have a guide system. And again, you don't typically have to like gut and kebab somebody to get the kill with the stab. What else? So the pocket stab is the high, right? So you throw up over, you get them to respond, so you boom, stab. Sometimes you don't even have to throw the full slash. You just stab, right? I'm supposed to connect there. Additionally, you can do like low, so you fake low, and then you stab. So when you fake low, your opponent's often going to move into that position to get that block. right? So down, up, use the sectants, look at my combat theory video, and it kind of gives the basics of how to build your combos, as well as look at my combo and setups class as well. And this is how you're really going to be able to figure out what works for you in your stabbing technique, or how to like build your own stab combos. Lastly, or penultimate, I would say, is there is the hip stab, where I'm trying to get this one. So this is, you're really going to want to sell this, and then you step in. It's really hard to get. Getting a stab on this hip is so hard. Honestly, if you're going to try to throw a stab for that location, I would just say throw money. Because typically if you can get in that position down here and you're going to be able to hit with the stab, you're going to be typically going to be able to hit with the slash. You're not going to have to spend so much time and resources to get the stab off, whereas the money is like a much safer shot. But if you can look cool, then do it. Last combo that I have, or like way to get a stab with the shield, it's the can opener. This is just, it's kind of disrespectful, but I love it. And so what the can opener is you're using your board to open up your opponent, and then you stab them. This is going to be very dependent on the type of board your opponent is using, and the type of board that you have. So here, this is a punch. It's really easy to manipulate punch boards. Look at my intro to Sword and Board video, right? Boom, stab. And you can do it really easily, and I'm still covered in this position. Granted, I'm using a punch as well. It's often a very devoted movement to get it to do a can opener with a punch shield. If you have a strap, it's much easier to do. If your opponent has a strap, it's going to be much harder to open their can lid, for example. So you can come in and lip, stab. You can also do it with the pommel. Be very careful. You can like hurt people with this, or like do illegal contact, so just be careful. But the basic is you're using your pommel to open, and then you stab. If you can like do a slash too, it works as well. But doing the stab with the can opener is always like disrespectful, but man, it looks good. Okay, so that's what I have for the different categories. Now I'm just going to talk about drills really fast. With drills, I would say the biggest thing with stabs is working on your accuracy. Having poor accuracy is often how you stab people in the face. So you got to work on it. So how do you work on your accuracy with stabs? What I've seen to be one of the most effective ways is like getting a tennis ball or something small, like, I don't know, like a plushie or something like that, and tying it to like a ceiling or to like a door frame, and you just stand there and you just repeatedly stab it from guard. You like, if you have a Pell, you know, you can like paint a target, or just like have in your mind a location that you want to consistently hit, and you just Pell and do that stab. Do the underhand stab, do the flat stab. If you're going to do a low stab, do a low stab in like the lower sectant, right? If you do a low stab in the upper sectants, that's how you go up and hit them in the chest, or in the neck and in the face. Additionally, integrate the movements, right? No fight, almost no fight is ever just, here we go, boom, boom, boom. You know, there's always movement. So doing the stab with the offline step in one direction, doing the offline stab in the other direction, right? Faking, you know, do a slash into a stab, doing the block riposte stab, stuff like that. Building those shot, or that muscle memory is really important. And I think that's kind of the best way to practice it. So that's all I have for today. Thank you all for being here and your time and attention. And I'll see you next time on my Newb to Warlord series. Thanks, guys.